Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, why Saudi Arabia needs foreign cash to forge a post-oil economy. Also this week, the first post-Brexit EU budget. A cup of coffee a day is all it costs its citizens, according to the Commission, but new funding rules are making some members very unhappy. Plus, Russia and Iran want it blocked, but millions of internet users love it. We'll take a look at the messaging app Telegram. Brand new megacities allowing women to drive, foreign-run cinemas. The oil-rich kingdom of Saudi Arabia is doing everything it can to convince the world that it's serious about change. It's on a charm offensive, promoting itself as an international investment destination, trying to lure foreign money to help it create a new economy to prevent future instability. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's economic reforms are all about breaking the kingdom's reliance on oil. On Wednesday, the IMF said Riyadh's break-even oil price for 2018 is likely to be around $88 a barrel. Brent is currently trading down around $74 a barrel, and although oil is considerably up from 2014, the director of the IMF's Middle East department, Jihad Azour, said the focus in Saudi needs to remain on economic and social reform.
I think the fact that we are currently witnessing a recovery globally and in the region, and the fact that oil price is going up, it shouldn't at any point in time considered as a way for them to relax effort and to be complacent.
Well, oil levels are still too low to balance the books. The 2018 budget deficit is predicted to come in at around $52 billion. So the plan is to raise cash through the sale of state assets like Saudi Aramco. It's tipped to be the largest IPO in history when it lists a 5% stake on the Saudi stock market. Attracting foreign investment is key here, but Aramco hasn't opened up the books. And there's a risk that because of its size, it would cause the stock market to move in tandem with the oil prices, and that's despite the goal to diversify away from crude. Saudi Arabia also has its $250 billion sovereign wealth fund. That money is being put into everything, from artificial intelligence to robotics. But those kind of investments take time to pay off. And in the meantime, the country's youth need jobs. The International Monetary Fund said that unless deeper reforms are made, millions of young people entering the labour market each year may not find work. Well, joining us now from London is Richard Segal. Richard's a senior emerging markets analyst with Manulife Asset Management. The fund manager controls around $400 billion of global investments and is exactly the kind of money manager that Saudi Arabia wants to attract. Richard, hello, welcome to Counting the Cost. Saudi officials think that they can grow the economy, the non-oil sector, that is, of the economy by the year 2030. Is that realistic, do you think? You're in this for the long term, are we?
Yes, but we do have to think long term. The market hasn't been very open to foreign investors yet. There have been some listed equities and some state-owned companies have issued bonds, but I would say it's still very early days. However, if we're willing to look 5 to 10 years down the road, then I think there will be tremendous opportunities, if only because we are moving here from a standing start.
Is Saudi Arabia overstretching itself? What happens if it fails to meet those targets?
I don't think yet. I think there is not enough evidence in yet. But at the same time, I wouldn't be overambitious about what they can offer near term. We had earlier hoped that the Aramco IPO might occur sooner rather than later, but then they realized it's more important to do it properly rather than quickly. And these things can be very flexible. If a lot more work needs to be done, if they underestimate the amount of financial disclosure required for the global investment community, they can always postpone it. And they also have the breathing space now that oil prices have more or less doubled or slightly more from their bottoms of a few years ago.
Let's talk about the lack of transparency in Saudi Arabia. That's not going to sit comfortably with Western fund managers, is it? I mean, for instance, the Aramco IPO, the Saudis insist that the world's largest oil company by reserves is worth around $2 trillion US, but independent experts doubt that. I mean, they're saying it's anything around 1 trillion, possibly less. It's more or less a guessing game when it comes to Saudi Arabia. There are no good figures to look at here, are there?
Yes, that's correct. And this is something that Aramco and other companies that will be privatized will have to consider over the near to medium term. It's analogous, I would say, to a lot of the tech companies, which were quite small to begin with, but have since become world leaders. It was a guessing game then, and if we look in retrospect, it's almost alarming how little we knew then. But if you wait a couple of years, valuations become a lot more precise. An item I would highlight is that the IMF published a report about the Middle East region, and they did note that non-oil growth is exceeding that in the oil sector this year next by 2 or 3 percentage points, which is impressive. But in order for the Saudis to meet their goal for increasing the size of the non-oil economy, they either have to be more patient, meaning wait 10 to 15 years, or allow the economy to become much more diverse. And I think it's probably more likely the latter. I think they will achieve their goals, but it will take longer than they hope.
Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, the government investment vehicle, has what? Something like $250 billion of assets under management, and there are plans to expand that to $400 billion by 2020 through local and international investments. But I come back to it. I mean, is this all too risky? Can the kingdom do it?
I think that in itself would be a bit ambitious in terms of timing. If we are talking about 2025, that might be realistic, but we're almost midway through 2018. And the nature of this, in many other plans of this government and others in the region, is that it's important to have targets and ambitions, but also accountability. But I think they also, with the exception of the introduction of VAT, underestimated how difficult it would be to launch fiscal tightening, reduction of subsidies, and introduction of structural reforms from a standing start, when in many cases they didn't even have the computer systems in place, and that in itself can take a long time. A lot of testing is required. I wouldn't necessarily say that they are taking on too much risk, but I would say that they are maybe biting off more than they can chew, so maybe they need to take smaller bites.
Okay,
and they
Richard,
will eventually get there, but not as quickly.
Many thanks indeed, Richard, for being with us on Counting the Cost. Really good to talk to you.
Thank you. Same here.
Now, in Russia, people are flying paper planes to protest against recent restrictions on internet freedom. They're a symbol of support for the encrypted messaging app Telegram, which the Kremlin recently banned, and it's also being banned in Iran. Al Jazeera's Jonah Hull reports.
In Moscow, they demanded the government unblock the popular instant messaging app Telegram. The company had refused an official order to hand over the data encryption keys that keep messages sent on Telegram private. Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, says that privacy is a shelter for criminal and terrorist groups. But Telegram users see it as an attack on free speech.
This protest about freedom in Russia.
It's a beginning, it's a very start of censorship.
Telegram is a symbol, I think.
It is the symbol of a free internet in the world.
Telegram's logo depicts a paper plane, and hundreds were launched as demonstrators shouted anti-Putin slogans. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was there, ensuring the authorities would not overlook this demonstration.
I have my rights and I don't care about these bans. I do what I want, what I need to, and whatever I'm allowed to do under the Constitution.
Russia is not the only country in which Telegram has fallen foul of the authorities. On Monday, Iran's judiciary sidelined the reformist government by announcing a ban on the app. Also citing threats to national security, the clerics said Telegram had been used to organise anti-government protests that swept the country in January.
It's a combination of something like WhatsApp and Twitter that we might have here in the United Kingdom. So it's these two platforms combined for Iranians oftentimes. So it's very important. And if you look back to some previous elections, you can kind of correlate the victories of those that won the most seats in parliament or the Rouhani victory, you can kind of see how effective they were in using social media, especially in using various Telegram channels that were supporting them.
So Telegram is seen as a threat by those opposed to reform in Iran, and protesters in Russia would say the same thing. The app's founder, Russian entrepreneur Pavel Durov, is fighting back. He's promised to fund anyone developing proxy platforms online able to dodge the ban.
Jonah Hull reporting. Still to come on Counting the Cost, a culinary sensation not to be sneezed at. How a prized spice in Cambodia is helping farmers weather a drop in global pepper prices. But first, mining for gold is the only source of income for many people living in the eastern part of South Sudan. But the country isn't benefiting from it because most of the gold discovered is quickly smuggled out of the country. Al Jazeera's Hiba Morgan reports now from Capoeira State, where gold digging is a way of life.
Lokitipo and his friends come to this stream every day and spend long hours panning for gold. They're hoping to find even a few tiny specks of the precious metal to support their families.
I come here to make a living. I sift through the sand and look for gold because it's the only way for me to feed my mother and father. If I find some specks of gold, I sell it and get money to feed my family.
The 20-year-old says he can make about $30 a day if he finds a gram of gold. And in South Sudan, where the inflation rate is more than 120%, that's a fortune. The value of the South Sudanese pound has tumbled because of the economic crisis caused by the 4-year-long civil war. For many here, selling gold to traders is the only way to survive, but the government is losing out. Because of the inflated economy, miners sometimes prefer to sell gold to traders themselves without going through a government body. The gold is then smuggled across the border and sold for higher prices, robbing South Sudan of its wealth. Less than half a dozen companies have licenses to mine for gold in South Sudan. The civil war has discouraged many companies, and miners working for themselves prefer to deal directly with traders who prefer gold instead of the declining currency.
South Sudan's currency is not accepted everywhere. Things are becoming expensive, so if we can find any other currency like gold, yes, we'll take it to keep up with the inflation.
The size of South Sudan's gold reserves isn't known, and fighting has caused more gold to go abroad.
Traders come from Uganda and Kenya and buy gold from the miners. People find gold in abundance, but if traders give them $30 while we give them 20, then miners won't come to us. We are supposed to get at least 5 kgs every 2 weeks, but we don't get even 1 kg. We are trying to control the borders, but we can't.
Lack of control, which makes it easy for prospectors such as Lokitipo to get a better price from traders than they would from the government, allowing them to buy more food for their families.
Talks between the United Kingdom and the European Union over how Britain exits the bloc are in crisis, and one of the key reasons is disagreement over what will happen on the island of Ireland after Brexit. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator is calling for a deal to preserve the so-called invisible border between the Republic of Ireland, which will remain in the EU after Brexit, and Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. People there are worried about the return of customs checks and security posts on the long-troubled Irish border. Lawrence Lee reports.
If anyone needed proof of how the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator is viewed in Ireland, then the welcome from the Irish Prime Minister said it all. Dundalk's Technology College was occupied by the leadership of the entire political class and everyone else with an interest in making Brexit work for Ireland and, by extension, the European Union.
I have the honour of introducing someone who has become a household name in Ireland.
Mr Barnier, they all said, you will have no closer friend than us. And he in turn promised to defend Ireland to the end.
There is no added value to Brexit. The consequences of Brexit should not and must not lead to the return of a hard border, neither on maps or in mines.
Dundalk itself is only a few kilometres over the border with the UK, and virtually everyone here crosses as a matter of daily routine. The man from the city's Chamber of Trade is raging at what he sees as the UK's planned betrayal of people here by the proposal to leave the customs union with Europe.
I have somebody that works for me that lives in Monaghan town, which is 30 miles away, or about 50 kilometres. So she crosses the border twice on the way to work, and she crosses the border twice on the way home. Now, she said to me, I don't mind being late in the morning, but I do have a worry over picking the kids up before 6 o'clock in the evening.
The hills around the border have in the past seen fighting between Irish Republicans and the British Army. There were also smugglers' routes for contraband. The peace dividend opened the border and encouraged trade. So what next? So we're just crossing the border from the Republic of Ireland into the north and therefore the UK. More or less the only reason why you'd know is because the road signs change colour. And that's true in dozens and dozens of other border crossings between the two countries, and communities in all of those places are desperately worried that the UK's lack of clarity about what Brexit really means will end up with physical roadblocks all over the border. Mr Barnier then went to Newry, the British city just over the border in the north, where he offered his support to people who fear exactly the same things as the people he'd met in Dundalk.
The business community in Northern Ireland wants to remain in the customs union, It also wants to retain access to the single market. So if those are two outcomes from the end of this process just for Northern Ireland, that's a very positive thing. That would make Northern Ireland one of the most attractive investment locations in the world.
But there is one party here which doesn't like Mr Barnier sticking his nose into Northern Ireland at all, and it props up the British government, keeping Theresa May's Conservatives in power.
He is here to represent the views of the European Union 27, so he's not an honest broker. He's here to represent their views, and the UK government will represent the views for the people of Northern Ireland.
Given that the British government is in disarray anyway and split in half over its Brexit strategy, it isn't difficult for Mr Barnier to look like he knows what he's doing. He and his supporters must hope they can use this tour and the UK's weakness to press home their advantage.
The European Commission rolled out its long-term trillion-dollar EU budget proposal this week. It's significant for a number of reasons. For starters, it's the first post-Brexit financial blueprint. A smaller EU, it seems, does not mean a smaller budget. And that's upset the richer states. Poorer states are upset too, because there are big changes to how money is dished out between member states. Well, joining us now from Glasgow is John Barclay. John's a professor of European Policy Studies and the director of the European Policies Research Centre at the University of Strathclyde. John, good to have you with us. One of the key takeaways for me is the linking of funding to rule of law. How much of a problem is that going to cause the Visegrad countries?
That's going to be a big problem. One Polish diplomat has called the proposal toxic. Clearly, it is aimed very much at countries like Poland and Hungary, possibly others also. And this has been a big issue for Germany in particular, but also some other richer countries that would like to see more conditions being attached to the EU funding that is transferred to poorer countries. How the linkage between budget transfers and conditions like the rule of law, how they will be organised is still unclear. Potentially, according to the European Commission, it could be determined by the Commission itself, although I think member states will probably be loath to see that happen. They'll want to see greater oversight. But that's one more issue that creates a problem, because potentially for a country like Poland, which has been the largest recipient of EU funding, getting something like 70 billion euros in the current period, they face not just cuts in the global amounts that they get, but also that the funding is linked to conditions, partly the rule of law, but potentially also the kind of economic policies that they implement.
There is a recognition in this budget in terms of the impact of migration, not just in terms of security, but in terms of the very impact that migration has had on countries. How significant is that?
Well, that's also one of the big issues for this round of budgetary negotiations. What the Commission has proposed is that there would be, first of all, a budget line, which is specifically about managing migration, or the consequences of migration, but also in some other policy areas like cohesion policy, the economic development policy budget line that that would be used to deal with the consequences of migration. Richer countries have been concerned by the fact that the impact of integrating migrants, receiving migrants and integrating them, is being borne very much by the Western European countries, and Central East European countries have largely refused to take, if you like, what are called migrant quotas. So the European Commission is proposing that part of its budget is used to help those countries which have been in the front line of either receiving migrants, like Italy and Greece, or integrating them into societies, like Germany, Sweden, and so on, that they get help through the budget. Of course, some Central East European countries see this as a further area of discrimination against them. Some have said that that's the Central East European countries, are being punished for not accepting migrant quotas. So this is yet another politically difficult issue that will be part of the discussions.
John, the EU Commission reckons that it costs its citizens the price of a daily cup of coffee. Is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, in absolute amounts, the EU budget is huge. It's proposed to be something like 1.27 trillion euros over the next period from 2021 to 2027. But it is a very small percentage of the EU economy. So, we're talking about something like 1.14% of EU gross national income. So while the EU budget may be small in percentage terms, it's still a significant political issue how much each country has to contribute.
John, it's been really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And finally this week, the price of pepper has plummeted around the world and is forecast to stay low because of an oversupply from Vietnam and India. But one remote region in the south of Cambodia seems to be immune from the slump. Al Jazeera's Wayne Hay reports from Kampot, where people claim to produce the most expensive pepper in the world.
There is no machinery in sight to pick this precious commodity. Harvesting Kampot pepper is labour-intensive. Growers say hand-picking is necessary to achieve the highest quality possible.
We don't use fertilizers or chemicals, and the weather here makes the pepper delicious and spicy. It's different from other areas in Cambodia and other countries.
The pepper from this region has become sought after around the world. 2 years ago, it was given protected geographical indication status by the European Union. It's a standard used to identify products that have a link to a specific country or region, like Scotch whisky or Parma ham. Products from here are exported mainly to the United States, Europe and Japan, which is in contrast to pepper from other parts of Cambodia. The Cambodian pepper industry is growing quickly, but outside this region it has a problem. It's competing with, and to a large extent relying on, its neighbour Vietnam, which is the largest producer of pepper in the world. Because of a lack of infrastructure and investment, most Cambodian pepper is sent across the border through middlemen for processing, cutting into farmers' slim profits. The Cambodian government is promising to invest more in facilities and marketing. As an example, it's looking to the success of Kampot, which has benefited from foreign investment and is largely self-sufficient when it comes to processing. It's also been immune from the price slump caused by oversupply that's seen the price of black pepper fall by around 60% to below $3 a kilogram. Kampot prices have remained stable, as high as $28 a kilo. Still, last year the region also produced more than it could sell, but industry leaders say they're not concerned about low prices spreading to their products.
Price is not so important. It's really the quality that matters. So I think we can keep the price at the current level. So no risk, because this is a niche market and the production will grow slowly year after year.
It's a niche market with a big price tag that, at the moment, other farmers around the world can only dream about.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, get in touch with us. You can tweet me, I'm @afinnegan, on Twitter. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our webpage, which has individual reports, links, and even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news is next on Al Jazeera.